Welcome to the Cybersecurity Awareness Forum live panel session number 46, Managing Metrics for Human Risk Management. And your organization may be using training completion rates and phishing test data points to measure your program's effectiveness. But today we're going to dig deeper into what metrics and KPIs are appropriate for your organization and how they should be managed from a broader risk perspective. So let me just turn off my sharing here and we'll start doing some little deeper discussion, more personal. So as you might have heard, there's a movement in the industry toward human risk management as a more complete approach, to managing human risks. But for the last 10 years or so, I think the focus has really been a lot on security awareness. Everybody sort of understands that term, but it doesn't really capture a lot of things that we as an organization, and especially from a risk management point of view, what we want to discuss and be able to control. And as we discussed in a previous session, Cybersecurity Awareness Forum number 42, I think it was, we were in 46 now, so it was a couple of months ago. It was entitled Moving from Security Awareness to Human Risk Management. And I learned a lot in that session, thanks to our panelists today, as well as others who contributed. And what I learned was security awareness is always going to be a thing because it's a tool for educating staff. But human risk management really aims to more broadly identify and assess and treat the risks related to humans in an organization. So it's more encompassing, and I think you'll find it useful. And today we're going to look at what that means and hopefully provide you with some actionable insights for managing your security awareness and human risk management programs. So just a little bit of housekeeping. Welcome everybody if it's your first time, and would love you to type in where you're coming from around the world as you join. The Cybersecurity Awareness Forum is an open collaboration group for anyone passionate about security awareness and human risk management. And it's brought to you by ClickArmor, which is the interactive security awareness platform that engages employees through proven gamification techniques to improve proficiency and make it easier to deploy security training and assessments for organizations. I'm Scott Wright, the CEO and Chief Engagement Officer at ClickArmor, and I'd like to introduce our panel now. So we have with us Thea Mannix, who is a behavioral neuroscientist with over 10 years of experience in studying how the biology of our brains can influence our behavior. And in her role as Director of Research for Praxis Security Labs, Thea now works on applying her experience and expertise to cybersecurity scenarios around the human element. So perfect for today's discussion. And we have Beck McEwen from the UK, who is a chartered psychologist with 20 years of experience in researching and evaluating human performance in the defense and security sector. The knowledge and insights gained from this research give Beck a unique perspective on the ways humans behave when working in complex, uncertain, and ambiguous environments such as cybersecurity. And we have Ryan Healy-Ogden, who's the Director of Cybersecurity Solutions here at ClickArmor and is a passionate speaker and educator who loves helping people understand and implement great security training programs. So with that, I'm going to start sharing again, if I can find my silly Zoom controls. 1 second here. There we are. Okay, so we'll get back to my deck. There we are. Excellent. So just to do a little bit of housekeeping, we do record these sessions. We record them. We do the transcripts. We create a quarterly CISO report on security awareness. And we also have a community where we post a lot of the notices and videos that we have recorded. So we'd love to have you enjoy those things and share them if you can. So at this point, I'm going to turn things over to Thea, who graciously volunteered to help us set the context for this discussion. And after Thea introduces us to it, we're going to have a few questions. We'll do some poll questions that everybody can participate in, and we'll have some open questions for the panelists. And we'll really encourage people to enter their questions and comments in the chat as we go. So take it away, Thea.
Thank you, Scott. Thank you. I'm very excited to introduce this. I'm going to try not to bang on so we can actually have a discussion. But yeah, we're going to talk about metrics and human risk management. So the first thing that I'd like to say to people is, what is a metric? So it is a measurement tool, basically. So the purpose of metrics in my view is to orient you about where you are so that you can determine whether the things that you're actually implementing are driving you in the right direction or not. They're not necessarily numbers. They're not necessarily completely in and of themselves a complete answer to all of your questions. They're quite a shady area actually. So this is something I'd like to get into. We can go to the next slide there.
Sure.
So they can be either direct or indirect. So I would say that phishing simulations, for example, are a direct measurement. So, but they're not a direct measurement of your overall human risk. They're a direct measurement of risk within phishing, provided that you are doing them correctly, which unfortunately I do believe that most of them people are not doing, but they can be very, very useful in doing that. And you can also have indirect measures. So these can be, for example, some sort of engagement metrics that you have. So if you're holding events, if you're holding some sort of awareness campaign, and you look at how many people within your organization are engaging and in what way they're engaging in a qualitative measurement, that would be an indirect measurement, but a fairly accurate measurement of awareness and engagement. And that's an indirect measurement of culture. So you've got these two quite disparate things that you kind of, people tend to land on one side or the other, right? I want qualitative measurement or I want quantitative measurement. But in reality, the best method, I think, is to use a mixed method for actually measuring any kind of security actual human risk. Quantitative measurements are often under scrutiny from people because they are generally quite reductive. You're trying to put a very complex human process down to like a single number. So for example, what were your click rates last time? And there's a lot of issues within a lot of these direct measurements. So for example, where we have phishing simulations, we found that you can randomly have a difference in phishing simulations of 40%. That's just
Wow.
simply down to differences. So yeah, we're also talking about things like qualitative measurements are probably where the core of your information is at. So these are like things like engagement measures. They might be, for example, like a questionnaire type assessment or interviews that you might give to people to actually assess what they understand about risk and how effective any training that you've given them has been, and how likely they are to actually implement that. Quantitative metrics, I believe the value in them is actually validating your qualitative information. It's not in relying on them. So for example, a lot of qualitative measurements are at danger of things like a social desirability bias, where people will tell you what they think you want to hear, but they're not actually behaving that way. So it's a good idea to get the quantitative measurements in, decide and look at how people are actually behaving. Are they using your MFA, for example? They're using VPN. Are they positively engaged in any events that you're running and so on? Because if they're not doing any of that, but your questionnaire says that they love your IT policy and they think you're amazing, you may have a bit of a disconnect there, somewhere there. So the quality is in the qualitative measurements, but the validation is in the quantitative measurements. They're still valuable. So both of these structures are valuable. I would absolutely recommend we do mixed methods. So
Interesting. So, but before we go on, I just wanted to sort of say, so it sounds like what you're saying is both kinds of metrics or all kinds of metrics have some weaknesses to them in terms of their variability or tolerances.
exactly. And they all have strength, but where you make the strength is how you sew them together, right? If
Interesting.
you have all
Cool.
these little knots, and actually it's the structure that you make out of them that gives you the strength of your metrics, is not individual numbers, right?
Right. Right.
Uh, yeah, yeah.
Cool. Well, I'm sure we'll get lots of good questions. I have questions in my mind, but let's keep moving. If you want to, is there more for you to present?
Just 2 minutes,
Yep,
promise.
sure. Yeah. No, absolutely. Take as much time as you want. It's all good stuff. So
So if you're looking at the value of your metric, really that is entirely subjective. What does that mean to you for what your aim is within your organization, within your industry, given your risk landscape? That is different for everybody. Anybody coming in saying, I'm going to give you these objective metrics, they're all numbers and they're going to tell you exactly what your risk landscape is absolutely selling you some sort of snake oil because it's just impossible to do that. That's going to be actually, it could be quite dangerous for you to become reliant on them. And that's one of the disadvantages of metrics. So if you're going into the idea of having metrics for your human cyber defense, you really want to make sure that number one, that you're using things that are relevant for you. And number two, that you're not becoming reliant on those metrics for telling you everything. They can actually reduce the amount of innovation that you have in your discovery because you become reliant on these numbers, right?
Mhm.
Which is really not a positive thing. That being said, currently we have no way of really demonstrating the benefit of a lot of the work that people are doing in security. They've really struggled to demonstrate the business value of that to people that aren't actually in the security industry. And that is really, really important in terms of integrating security into an organization. So metrics give you an opportunity to do that successfully. So I just want to give a couple of examples of metrics that we can use for human risk management. So those are, for example, phishing simulations. Again, if you're running them correctly, I think things like engagement metrics are probably more important and extremely important. There are also a couple, I know that Scott, that you shared my latest invention, which is a switch cost. So how much is cybersecurity implementations actually stopping people from doing their job? And where are the places that you can remove that? Because it is always a dance between productivity and cybersecurity, and it's not always one that should win over the other. Yeah, so, and I'm sure Beck's got 100 of them that she'd like to see people actually assessing. So certainly ask her about those. But yeah,
Yeah,
okay.
that's excellent. Thanks so much, Thea. I really appreciate it. And without sort of trying to jump too far ahead, I think I've shared some of the questions we're going to be discussing later with both you and Beck. So if you have any other things you'd like to add sort of as a context aid for us at the moment, feel free to jump in. Oh, you might be muted.
You'd think I'd learnt by now, wouldn't you?
We all
I've
suffer.
got my dog making grumbling noises in the background, so I thought I'd better mute myself in case you think there's something strange going on in my room.
No
Um,
worries.
obviously, Thea and I, we think along the same lines. We're both psychologists, and I think the biggest point that I want to sort of reiterate from what Thea said is it's about the people having a reliance on a number and want to attribute a risk to a number. We want to do that because our brains are lazy. We like things to be in nice, neat boxes. And I think it's quite a high risk for people to go and rely on those numbers in the boxes. I've even seen sort of somebody, can you design me a thing which is going to give each individual in my business a risk score so I know who I'm going to chase down as being a high risk person? And that just fills me with dread. And I think that we can't expect everybody to be an expert psychologist. We can't expect them to know these things. So I think it's up to us to educate people that you can't just reduce risk to a number. In my experience, that's far easier said than done. That to me is the biggest thing, is we like to talk about human risk management, and those words in themselves I find a little bit, they sort of set my teeth on edge a little bit, because I know with all the best will in the world that people are going to misinterpret that. So I think for me, that's the biggest thing. And I think also, Thea, I liked what you said about the balance between qualitative and quantitative, because the way the humans work, it isn't, everything's not reductionist to a simple behavior. We have attitudes, we have experiences, we have personal values and beliefs that can't necessarily be measured in a behavioral way. And I think that sort of also feeds into what I've just said about people finding it difficult to accept anything other than a number. And in fact, I saw on LinkedIn something, I think it was yesterday or the day before, that was like, well, if it's not a number, I don't trust it.
Wow.
Where do you sit? What do people like Theo and I do with that information? Because you're being pushed to give these things, yet we know deep down in our hearts that it's far more difficult than that. It can't just be all about the numbers. So I'm not sure I've helped there particularly.
Well, no, I mean, it's all input that we all have to process and decide for ourselves. But I just wanted to ask people in the chat if they want to fess up themselves and say, I prefer numbers, I prefer for qualitative, or I agree that there should be a balance. I'd love to hear people's views on that.
I think
Go ahead,
we're
Ryan.
conditioned. We're conditioned as humans to have like risks and threats as numbers. It's until it's all about us. When you look at
Yeah, I was
like
just
if you
gonna
look
say,
right, you look
yeah.
at storms. Category 5, category 4. But we need to know and we need to qualify those things because people prepare and get ready to defend against risks based on the severity. So sometimes having that number and that association is helpful. But I totally understand that, yes, when you have just you're chasing numbers, then if that's the only metric and you're not taking into the human consideration. Now, the second thought I have quickly before we move on about that, why people lean on numbers is because people are sometimes afraid to understand other people. So humans are kind of have like because humans are so different and their thoughts vary and the way they process things and everything else. They're so complex, but a number is a number, right? So it's that universal language, and so it's something easy to default to. So I think as we kind of push ourselves to look at these metrics, we almost have to push ourselves to think outside of our norms and actually look at people like people and not just another number.
Mm. Yeah, and I
Yeah.
see comments there, Matthew, in the comments there saying, and Mitchell as well, how on earth do you communicate that to the board when all the board want is numbers? And that is the challenge.
Yep.
And I think that there is a school of thought around looking at outcomes rather than risks. But then again, everybody likes the risk, human risk metrics. It's the latest thing, isn't it? So everybody wants that. It's a language that people understand.
And it's easy to
Like
sell a
say
number
muscle
too.
memory. Thea and I will both tell you that muscle memory is not what people refer to as in cybersecurity, but we understand what they mean because they're using a phrase that's familiar. And I think that is it's a similar sort of thing. We're looking at the language used, and we're kind of, my problem I feel is certainly I'm stuck with this way of needing to work, and then it's trying to find that happy medium between bringing what we know is the right metric and then translating that somehow into a metric that others can understand. Sorry, Thea, you've got your hand up.
No, absolutely. You're completely right. This is my struggle on a day-to-day basis. It's like trying to, you have to give people what they need, but also, you're having to kind of try and convince them to do it a different way that isn't so black and white, which is very technology based, right? It works or it doesn't. And in psychology, a lot of things work for some people, sometimes under some conditions. And from a technologist perspective, that is the seventh circle of hell, right? I mean, things should work or they don't.
All the time, yeah.
It's binary. Like, what do you mean sometimes? But also you have the issue of cybersecurity is operating within business and it has been contaminated by business requirements. So these are KPIs, right? These are business requirements. When they do marketing campaigns, when people run revenue, we're looking at revenue. What do we do? How do we sell? What do we, and they apply that to cybersecurity because cybersecurity, unfortunately, is operating within business. And really, business needs to operate within cybersecurity. Which would give us an opportunity to tell them this is how we measure it, right? It's not black and white, it's not transparent, it's incremental, it's qualitative, it's down to expert opinion. You have to have like these discussions and so on. They don't understand that. They're like, but is it bigger or smaller?
Yeah.
And no, that's not what that's not what we're talking
But
about.
ours go to 11, right?
Yes,
Exactly.
But I think what you're highlighting is that if
Like-
cybersecurity is a line item on a budget, then you're already in trouble from the get-go because if you have to fight for that budget and there has to be justification, and what's our justification, not what Scott believes on because of his survey, or not what Thea gave his feedback, or the human experience of things. No, the budget is approved on numbers and KPIs. So I think you've already gone down the wrong path if as an organization you look at it from a line item. You need to look at it as would you get just a little bit of a fire, alarm, or would you get the whole fire alarm? Like, why don't you just look at it as a holistic thing? It needs to be done. That is the budget. What it takes to secure your organization should be the budget. And I think, from someone who's been, in the sales experience side of cybersecurity, you definitely see where people are misappropriating budgets and not spending in the right areas and chasing metrics and numbers and flashy things, and I think it's doing everything a massive disservice, but here we are.
All right. So we're going to move to the part where we ask a poll question to our audience. And we're going to start this one with just a basic one. Other than training completion and phishing simulation, click rates or report rates, does your organization use key performance indicators for measuring, reporting on, or managing human risks? So the options are yes, and love to hear what people are saying they measure. No, or no, but I can imagine a lot of organizations are saying, I'm trying to get this implemented and I have these ideas for things I want to implement, and love to hear what people are actually planning to do if they haven't yet. And others may just say, I don't know. So we're going to let that run for a bit. And then we're going to ask a similar question to the panel. How should an organization determine and prioritize which indicators are appropriate to measure? And, should they be quantitative or qualitative? And I know just based on our early discussions, there's not a one size fits all answer here, but I think maybe we can zero in on some that you can give clues to, Thea and Beck, on where you think people should be looking to try and somehow either quantify or assess their human risks.
Yeah, I mentioned the word outcomes, which is an interesting one.
Yeah.
I was looking at some research done by a university that I used to work for, and they're kind of trying to move people's thinking towards outcomes. So what are the outcomes you actually want from this? And if you look at it from a leadership perspective, then what it's saying is, you need communication through an organization. You need people to be, oh gosh, let me just get the thing up because I can't remember exactly what it said now, but yeah, so it was saying that actually, rather than measuring what they've actually been trained in, what impact does that have on the organization? So, sense making, skills and competencies, relationships and networks, alignment and engagement are the four of the things they're looking at. So if your cybersecurity is aligned with your overall company strategy and people are starting to move towards that, is that not a successful measure? But I guess it goes back to that return on investment for training thing, doesn't it? Again, it goes back to the numbers. How do you quantify what your outcome is in cybersecurity? Can you quantify how many attacks have been stopped? Because that's the outcome rather than how many people have undertaken the training. Do you see what I mean? But I'm not sure how that works because, again, as Thea quite rightly pointed out, it's hugely complex.
Yeah.
And different organisations have different things that they're aiming for. I mean, what we all want is to be safe. But what does that look like in terms of outcomes?
Yeah, Thea.
Sorry, good question there.
Something that's very fairly new, and it's called marginal analysis. So we really have adopted this significantly in my workplace and so on. We really love it because what it says is basically it doesn't matter what you measure ultimately. It should be intuitive for the people that are in charge of judging security. And the security professionals and security experts decide whether whatever incremental changes you've made have been positive or negative. So there's no number, there's no big whatever. You can put a number on it if you'd like to, in terms of when you present it to the board, you can come up with a 0 to 100 scale and everyone can vote on a number, right? And you can have this internally generated metric. But essentially, it's not about that. It says that the goal of marginal analysis is to encourage change, flexibility, and critical thinking. And those are the three things that it actually gives you. And what I love about it is that it is metrics. We've got quantitative metrics in there. We've got qualitative metrics in there. We can look at all of this information. But the ultimate goal is the outcome. It's just what Beck has just said. What is the outcome? And that is currently, honestly, I think the best measurement of an outcome is looking at the professionals that you have either within your organization or out there in the community to say this has been positive or negative based on that knowledge that they have internally, because we don't have an objective library at the moment to go to and say, was that good or bad? On a lot of human metrics. We don't. And the other thing is it can change dramatically. You can have a really good week and then you have a really bad week and you're like, okay, so what's the actual status here? A lot of the actual metrics that are provided by certainly not yourselves, but other security awareness training providers that I've worked with, are really dependent on how many of their products you've actually purchased, and not actually on
Yeah.
any kind of actual change. They're not measuring anything else. You know, I probably shouldn't name names on this situation, but like, you know, I want to. And you're using your security metrics to decide if things are better or worse. The other idea with it is that you introduce small changes most of the time, unless you require a significant change. So unless you've noticed something really, really big, so you've, for example, acquired a new organization into your organization, you may need to have a significant change in terms of bringing them into the culture, your organizational culture, security culture, etc. But otherwise, you do these small changes and you regularly assess, you base it on expert opinion, and you're flexible. You go back or you go forward based on whether that's been positive or negative. And I think that's probably, even though it's the most intangible thing that you can do, the most useful thing that I think people can do.
That's really
Yeah.
cool. And I was just going to say, I think some of that is intuitive until I know there will be people who say, well, what about all the variables that exist, you know, on an ongoing basis, you know, from over time, or how people are feeling from day to day? Did this thing work for them or not? So I think your idea of making small changes at a time can actually help, I think, control things better, right? You're not changing so many things and causing potentially unmeasurable things to happen.
I
Yeah.
think another benefit of that is the flexibility that you have with it, because things do change, you know, geopolitical situations change. Like Thea said, you might be acquiring a new business, there might be some big turnover in staff for whatever reason.
Well, even COVID was a big
Even
change that
COVID,
made us
exactly,
all
yeah.
work from home and have to immediately reassess on the fly. There were no metrics to say, you know, breaches are going to go up X, Y, Z because you're working from home now. But
Yeah.
we just knew inherently that, whoa, people are just now chilling at home on public Wi-Fi, and you know that's a problem. So we had to react and make a change. But
Yeah.
that doesn't happen all the time.
No, but I think that's also important, because if you've got something that's a moving, very flexible thing, it's almost like, I've got a picture in my head of, like, you know, when you have tuners on stereo equipment and you've got the different kind of lights going up and down, and you've got a balance of that, because, like, you know, everything is so complex all the time and changing all the time, that you're going to have that sort of waves of change, and sometimes you're going to be more secure than others. But to me, the sort of metrics that Thea's talking about there gives you a very, very fine-tuned point. So, you know, you can make small changes. If it's going massively up, at least then you've got some indication of where that's happening and what you need to do to get that balance back down again. So I think that, I mean, obviously I'm well on board with that. How do you then convince the board with that? Is it the traditional red, amber, green? You know, you can see where things are creeping up in one particular area and you can try and bring it back down. I don't know. But to me, that just seems more, it makes more sense to me than having a fixed number and say, well, out of 10, you've got a risk score of 9 over here and 5 over there.
Mhm.
So I don't think that, as Thea said, it's not truly getting at what's really going on within the organisation at any given moment.
No,
Yeah.
and there's no way any any human would maintain the same risk score for a 30-day period in a row. It's absolutely impossible. I mean, I personally would be from like morning to night have a different risk score, right? Like I know that, you know, I'm more, you know, I pay better attention in the morning at night or something like that. Like everyone's different, right? Or what happens when the kids get home from school and you're working from home and now you're more distracted? Does your risk score change? Like we don't take into consideration even the smallest things. We just give people a score and then they're off they go. So then they have almost a false like sense of confidence at times, I feel, because you know they're now walking around thinking, oh, I've got an 8 out of 10, but they're not taking into consideration the human element and factors of just of other things that are going on. So I think it's very misleading, I think, sometimes.
Yeah, but it's easy, so we like it.
Oh, and you can sell off of it. I was going to say that before. Like, you know, the entire sales cycle that makes money, that pays everyone's bills, is all based off of metrics and numbers, because that's how we've been used to selling everything else forever. So we have to apply the same thing here, right?
Yep. Yeah.
I think I would like to make a case for making two different types of metrics, and those are the metrics that you use internally as a security expert for yourself, and metrics that you use to present your information to the board. I also think even though we have all these metrics, and I myself am someone in the business of providing those metrics for people, right? So I'm not saying that that's not useful to go looking for external parties to do that. Security professionals need to trust in their own ability to understand risk. You can provide that information. You can set your own baseline. Why don't you make your own red, orange, green, and you present that to your board members? You know, they're not going to sit there and go into detail with you. This is what we would love them to do, but frankly, most of them aren't going to bother doing that. They just want to know what's the situation. You don't necessarily need some external somebody who knows nothing about your business, who's not interested in what you're doing, to say to you, this is your risk. You know risk better than anybody else. If you're a CISO, you know your risk of your company better than anyone else on the planet. What you need are the resources that come and support you in developing those numbers so that they're meaningful for you. It's not like, stop putting this thing like we need somebody on the phone telling me what my risk is. You know what your risk is. Let's try and teach people how to translate that into a way they can present it to a board member. You don't necessarily need to have the same metrics for what you understand for your security as what you're presenting to, for example, C-suite board members, etc.
Yeah, and you would
Yeah.
hope the CISO knows the risk because they're liable for it, and it's now been
Liable.
proven that they've been liable for it. And you're right, they've been charged for it, so they should know their risk better than a third-party vendor.
Yeah, I was just going to say, it's really interesting. I really like that approach of, having your published metrics, call it, right, that you would give to the board versus your own internal working metrics. And I agree that the board, if they see a yellow or a red, they want to know why, and you should be prepared to give them a reason why, and it should be, rational and thought out. But I've actually seen, security executives, CISOs, CIOs, where they really want to know every last thing about like a phishing simulation. Like, why did this person show that it clicked here and it didn't show up in this part of the the infrastructure, right? And they're trying to nail down like every last data point to understand if each person, was measured properly or not. And I think the point here is it's very difficult to and maybe pointless to have a risk score, as Beck said, for each individual person, whereas doing it on an aggregate sort of tends to balance out the biases, right, to some extent. So I think that there's a much better case for having an organizational risk level than for individuals. That's something we really didn't sort of plan to talk about here, but I think it's important.
I agree completely. Yep. Yeah, you can only really change the environment. Focusing on individuals is an absolute waste of time. You're never going to be successful doing that ever. You have to change the environment they're working in, and that's what you have to measure, not people, environment, behavior within the environment. Not
just look at it like a team sport, right? It's the whole team, measure the team's progress. The team has a win-loss record. It's not an individual thing, and we have to affect everyone if we want to move forward.
And also, they don't really need to know about individual metrics. Board members don't need to, even if they're asking about it, you need to present it to them in a way that's like, you don't need to know about that. This is what's important here. I'm the expert. I'm telling you.
Yeah. I've got a wonderful quote from a book here. It's a guy called James Reason. He wrote a book on human error. And if anybody who's worked in the aviation industry will more than likely have heard of him. It's my background. And there's this one particular quote, and I'm going to quote it from the book because I think this highlights what Thea's just saying there at the moment. And it says, rather than being the main instigators of an incident, operators tend to be the inheritors of system defects created by poor design, incorrect installation, faulty maintenance, and bad management decisions. Their part is usually that of adding the final garnish to a lethal brew whose ingredients have already been long in the cooking. And it's
Brilliant.
harsh. It's harsh, but I think actually it is about the environment, but the people take the blame.
Yeah,
Oh,
I agree.
for sure.
But I also think that it's important to distinguish that position from the one where we have technologists saying, well, we should just make sure that technology prevents people from doing bad things. I don't think that's ever going to happen, until we have AI doing everything, every job in the organization. At which point, I think I heard it once said that we will all become poets and philosophers, but there's probably even a risk in that. So I'm not going to go there. So I'm just going to share our next poll. I've had it running for a little bit, but it's how do you think your organization should go about setting targets for human risk management metrics? I had a few ideas here, but we also discovered some new things from Thea and back too. So I'm going to let people sort of ponder that for a little while, and then we'll maybe be able to expand a little bit more on that. How should you set the target values? So that's assuming we've all decided on what those values are. So maybe this question is not that relevant or valuable, but if you'd like, you can change the question or bring up a different idea around this. Beck or Thea?
Well, I don't know. I think, Theo, you kind of alluded to this anyway about you need to set your own target values. So what's important to you within your organisation? A banking organisation is going to have very different targets to, for example, I don't know, a manufacturing organisation to a health sector. You know, regulation is going to come into that as well. So I think that is it a brave thing to say you need to set your own targets? Do people have the confidence to actually want to do that for their organization?
I think it's the only thing they can do, right? I mean,
Yeah.
there are a lot of aspects of cybersecurity where we can all do the same things to set the same values for different devices for their policies, but for the people, everybody in the organization is thinking about different workflows, different terminologies, different risks, different, I don't know, policies, right? And so all of these different things require you to consider them before you say, what level do we need people to achieve for any given type of, threat scenario or risk?
Yeah, I also think there's a little dance you have to do between, again, that kind of internal. So you yourself being responsible for cybersecurity, what are you measuring? And also, what can you measure that's going to look good when you get to the end of the year and you've used your budget? Because that's one of the big issues with cybersecurity. You run a successful cybersecurity program, nothing happens. And they go, what did I get for my money? And you go, well, you got nothing. And they go, well, do you need that amount of money next year? I don't know, because it's not tangible.
Yeah.
So we also have to think about trying to create a few small tangible KPIs that we can try and use. And that's why I actually loved the idea of switch cost, because that's business value in there. If you can reduce friction, you can make a money number out of that, right? That's the amount of time people are using on cybersecurity. But I mean, that's just an idea, but I'm sure like people who are actively working as security professionals can, if they're triggered like that, can think of probably 100 different metrics they can use to try and encourage that kind of value representation of what they're doing. And then also have those kind of qualitative KPIs, and also adjusting and understanding that doesn't necessarily look like a number. It can look like an expert opinion. It can look like multiple expert opinions. It can look like a shift in culture that you've measured through some other very external method. I mean, it doesn't have to be a number, but where it does have to be a number, can we please try and come up with something that's useful for people? Because currently we're relying on things like phishing simulations, and that is utter nonsense in terms of actually relying on this one number for your entire security culture. It really is.
Yeah, thanks for that, Thea. I think it made me think of the whole idea, and many people on the call may already have thought or realized this, but there is something called a return on security investment, or ROSI. It's been discussed over decades, right? And the real sort of paradox is that if your security of any kind is working well, you tend to get less data about anything. And so that leads uninformed executives to make bad decisions about how much they should be investing in their security. And there's a legend that from 5 or 6 years ago, I can't name the company, but it was in the news that, a major multinational company had visibly reduced their cybersecurity team by 30% because the number of incidents went down.
Wow. Right.
So
just confusing. So when I was thinking about the metrics, and then Leslie in the chat made a good reference, taking consideration measure engagement by your employees as maybe like one of your key performance indicators. So there's so much passive information that we could collect about our employees and just their simple day-to-day workflows and things they do, that we could then give them a bit of a score, or maybe an understanding of how secure they are and how much they're working within our security culture goals. And that's like, are they visiting the intranet page? Are they reading the, the emails about security tips that are being sent out? Are they taking their training? And if they do, are they taking the training right away, or are they taking the training 60 days after it was launched and they had to get 3 reminders? Those are different indicators that can just be passively collected behind the scenes, that if you sit down, you could actually build a bigger picture about what your culture's actually doing. And then I think that would give you an idea of where your risk factors, may be, without having to have phishing simulations and have tests and have, direct in your face measurables where people, because people, when they, I mean, you pick on phishing simulations, but any test or any kind of pop quiz, there's, some people are going to just thrive and some people are going to clam up and some people are going to make the biggest mistake of their life and know that they answered it wrong, but still do it, right? That's just, it's not going to get you anywhere. But if you collect passive information about their day-to-day activities that they don't really know is that they're contributing to, you're going to get a better understanding of where your culture's at and how your people are. And I think you can learn a lot about it. And I think that would be an important KPI for me if I was sitting down to break some, to decide.
That reminds me of something that Praxis may be doing these days, right, Thea? You can speak about it if you'd like. I don't know if you're in a position to, but the fact that you guys are collecting or making use of data that's been collected by various tools around an enterprise, right?
Yeah, so our goal really isn't to tell people what metrics they should be using. It's to make the most number of metrics available to them as possible, qualitative and quantitative. And then they can go in and say, this is useful, this is not. And they also don't have to go and get the human resources to go and put their primary SOC guy on an Excel file for 2 weeks and he's trying to figure out how to make one column less messed up or whatever. We're going to do all that. So the idea is it's just to really implement that. This is why I'm so excited about what we're doing. This is what I do every day. We're trying to come up with metrics and measurements that we can provide people, and then they can build their own metric security program, their own metrics based on whatever.
I mean, that to me is incredible, because what that would say to me as well is that if you've got those things, so you've got people who are not doing it without 16 reminders, I would be that person, and not spending much time on it. Or I don't know if you've seen, there's a meme going around on the internet, and it's like the pig from Toy Story going really quickly pressing the buttons to get through the training. That's me. So if you've got somebody behaving like that, and then you've actually got a group of people behaving like that, what that tells me is not that the training's not working, but the training's not engaging. So therefore, there is a place to go and start looking, user-centered design. This stuff isn't working because they're not engaging with it. Why don't we go and do a user group with them and find out what's wrong with it?
Yeah,
exactly. And that's what
that's massively helpful.
Absolutely. Because you're looking at, they're looking at training completion rates. That's great. Everyone completed the training in under 30 seconds. Should have taken them 2.5 minutes.
Yeah.
You don't get that data from training completion rate. You just know they did the training.
But what they did the thing
is if you decide, I want to know how fast they did it, right? For example, we've got that information available. You can look into that, and that gives you indication that you need to then go in and look at that.
Yeah. It's funny. I'm just gonna say, this whole discussion makes me think people are going to be saying, well, we're getting really far away from security awareness. Well, yeah, we're actually expanding to human risk management, right? That's the whole, that's what this looks like, really, right? Is to be able to try to improve the management of risks for the organization, for all elements, people, processes, and technology.
But in a shameless plug, our platform collects a lot of these metrics that help dictate and help you change your culture and understand your people better. And we provide a platform that you don't just blast your way through. You can't, and you don't want to. So there are alternatives to some of those pitfalls out there. And, again, shameless plug, but I mean, there are different ways to get there.
Yeah, but it's not so shameless, honestly, Ryan, because I mean, again, that data is sitting in your systems. You can make that available to people very easily.
Absolutely.
Right? On a dashboard with everything else. And that gives it the value that they need. It's
rather than just, did they click? Yes or no?
Did they click? Oh yeah, we told them they shouldn't do that. Oh, but they did it anyway. So sorry. It's not it's not useful, but that is useful. It is useful information. Yeah, and it's about empowering people to create their own security programs. It's not about telling people how to build it. We don't need to tell people how to build it. We need to empower them to be able to build their own.
And I think if as an organization, if you can understand your own risk and come to that understanding yourself, versus being told by someone else, you have a higher chance of then being responsible for that risk and stopping those risks. Again, like if someone tells me I have high risk and then they tell me they've sold me the solution, like, am I going to do much more about my culture? I'm just going to rely on the fact that someone told me that my window was broken and that I needed a new one. That's right. I'm not going to go check the seal or anything else. I'm just going to believe them. Well, that has to change because that's the problem.
Yeah. Awesome discussion. Before we wrap up, I did want to cover one other one, which maybe we can make a little bit more, I guess, intuitive to people. It's not so hard on your brain to think about whether I should be doing qualitative or quantitative, but who should be responsible for this stuff? This could be an interesting discussion as well, right? Within an organization, is it the chief information officer? Is the chief risk officer, chief people officer, HR? What do you guys think? Everyone. Yes.
Yeah,
but somebody has to be responsible for driving it, right? So I guess that's what I was getting to.
Someone has to be liable, perhaps.
Okay.
Level. But I don't know. I think responsibility is everyone. But I think liability, honestly, I think it sits with the board. I think it sits with the C-suite generally. I don't think it sits on a CISO's head. I think a lot of CISOs are hired as, to cover somebody else's but in case something happens. So it's like, well, that was your job and that happened anyway. So I think reality, I think it is people in charge of the company. Again, cybersecurity, if we're operating within business for business and paid for by business, business has to provide the tools needed in order to ensure that's successful. And if they don't do that, then that's not on the CEO, that's on the people providing those resources.
Beck, any thoughts?
I can't really think of a way of saying it in any better way than Thea's just said it. But surely, I mean, it's like even in a crisis situation, everybody in the business has some sort of say in what goes on. They've got a piece of advice from their own section of the organization that's going to impact on the outcome. So shouldn't the same process or the same principle apply? That why should it all sit with cybersecurity? HR have a role. The learning and development people have a role. So should it not be a cross silo thing? Because then that helps build trust amongst the different departments and takes some of the burden off the cybersecurity team, because they're not responsible for how everybody behaves across the whole organisation. So should it be a shared effort, or at least be part of the conversation?
Yeah, I think I always want to try and say, like, is this stuff going to happen if somebody isn't designated by the board to make it happen, right? The board definitely has oversight, I'm sure, and they should be ultimately accountable. But is there somebody in the organization as a role that would be most suited to being able to balance these qualitative and quantitative things and look at it from a organizational point of view rather than trying to nail individuals, right? That's kind of where I was hoping to go with the question.
I would say a CISO. Okay. In that regard. But what I would like to see is the board members are liable for cybersecurity breaches, but the CISO is in charge of trying to make sure that doesn't happen. And I think that's probably going to give you the most healthy environment that you can operate in. Because the thing is, if you don't make them liable, I mean, they've got people, and they've got a lot of responsibility outside of cybersecurity as well. They're not going to pay attention
I mean, there's certainly, I think, already a lot of liability around cybersecurity. The SEC in the US is trying to make it happen that way, where organizations are able to or must report on cyber risks and things like that to the board. And I think from a human point of view, is there anything that they need to be doing differently, or do we need a different skill set or a supplementary skill set to help them do that and get to that result for the human risk side? Okay, so let's have a quick look at the poll results. I'm going to end this one now and see what we can view. First of all, I have to launch them in my browser, so 1 second. Talk among yourselves.
I would like to say something on this topic that come up, if I might be allowed.
Yes,
That is on the
Absolutely.
subject of pen testing, which is something that I think we see a lot of people wanting to use pen testing as a metric, so they regularly pen test the company.
Mhm.
And I think these are limited in a way that people don't really realize, because in terms of pen testing, you tend to get only the attacks that you have envisioned possible to happen to you.
Mhm.
That's quite limiting, right? And statistically, that's only a very small subset of what is potentially possible of happening to you. And it gives people such an incredible sense of safety that they stop looking for other places where they might be vulnerable.
Mhm.
But in terms of a metric, again, I think it's great. I love these quantitative metrics. They're so useful in context.
Yeah.
In context.
But
So
don't you think then a series of tabletop exercises covering more hypothetical situations may be a better way to explore some of those areas?
in terms of value, there's no comparison. In my opinion, there's absolutely no comparison
Right.
whatsoever.
Because
There's-
like with a pen test, it's happening against you and no one knows about it or is supposed to not know about it. But at least with a tabletop exercise, you're bringing everyone into the situation. You're reading in the executive team. You're opening eyes to people that may have never known that this was even a possibility for the organization. And then you get to walk through scenarios and practice your
Exactly.
playlist.
Pen test silos that threat almost.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Because it's just you and and people who understand what pen testing is. Now I'm saying I think it's really useful. I think we should
Mhm.
have it in the context of, for example, something like this.
But they're also very expensive and make people a lot of money.
Yes.
So you need
Okay.
one a quarter.
I just want to do a quick review of the poll results just to let people know what the others in the group were thinking. So other than training, does your organization use KPIs for measuring human risks? Most people are saying no. A couple of people said not yet, and some future thing ideas. And second question was, how do you think your organization should go about setting targets? I had a bunch of different options here. So most people are saying analyze I think it was the data available from different parts of the organization. So that sort of goes to our core part of our discussion. I think people kind of agree with that. And then on the third question, who? Most people are saying chief risk officer if they're available, I guess. I made this a single selection, so people had to choose one of them. But people didn't pick chief information officer when they had the choice of using a chief risk officer. So interesting. Thanks very much, folks, for engaging in that part of the discussion. And we'll just finish things up here with a couple of final notes. Boy, I took a lot of notes here around insights gained at all levels. I like to look at it from executives, CISOs, and board level, as well as the management and individuals. We didn't talk so much about how we help individuals today, but I noticed a lot of good discussion. You know, Beck brought in the idea that most of us want to have risk numbers to hang our hats on, and to have individual risk scores is not really that meaningful. So it's really more important to have the training engaging so that people actually learn from the beginning. Totally agree with that. And Thea had some great points around balancing, obviously, the direct, indirect, qualitative, and quantitative, and so many other great insights. I can't even list them all, but I liked the one about having internal metrics for your security team versus metrics for the board and executives that you can kind of explain, but don't necessarily have to go down into the details of who clicked on what. So love those comments. And then there was a good discussion between Ryan and Leslie in the chat about, you know, the customer journey, collecting passive data to just look at the metrics that are available within the organization from some systems that you may not have really thought to consider, that actually gives indications of how people are behaving. And then using that from, you know, Thea's perspective of just, can you decide whether or not it makes sense, right? Rather than trying to nail it down to a number, for example. So lots of great insights here. Any other people want to highlight insights that we learned today?
No, I would just say great discussion and thank you to Beck and Thea for enlightening me as always.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And so we just do want to pay some bills here. ClickArmor does sponsor these sessions, and I really appreciate everybody coming. Just wanted to highlight, from the perspective of what we talked about today, it comes down to a lot around, I think, role-based training requirements. So we're seeing a lot more, privileges given to people that aren't really IT people or security people. So maybe SaaS application administrators and others who are on the front lines, and they need special training that isn't really covered in your typical off-the-shelf security training programs. So we're actually available to help build custom training that helps people engage with their own role in their own environment with those policies, workflows, terminology, risks, etc. So would love to chat with you if you have any special requirements around creating engaging security awareness training or security training in general. A couple of other quick notes. I've mentioned this in past sessions, but we've teamed up with Conceal, who does a really good job at browser tab isolation. So when people go to a specific site and your systems can't determine whether it's officially a dangerous site, Conceal can actually put a risk score on it and then isolate them into a virtual machine that's not on the computer, but it looks similar to the person. And so it gives people a chance to see what's on the page that they were about to view and then maybe report that they need to go there. So it's a really cool system, and we have a bundled packaging pricing there for you guys for
Yeah, and something
25.
cool.
And yeah, go ahead, Ryan.
Oh, Conceal is they're just about to launch devices now, like so iOS and Android device
Cool.
kind of protection. So again, since so many employees are on the move and everything else, and that phishing email, right? We again pick on the phishing sim so we can teach people all about this. But you're busy with the kids at 8:30 in the morning, and that email comes through, and you click that link. Now at least your device is going to be that last step.
There's one more metric thing that I really like about what Conceal's doing. It comes to what we talked about. How do you really measure people equally or fairly? And with the Conceal system, they actually gather the data about who did click to go to a particular dangerous site, and that means we can isolate people. We can look at what part of the organization might be more susceptible to going to these kinds of sites. So we can do more of that kind of data analysis using this kind of tool as well. All right, our next session. Boy, we're right at on the top of the hour. So thanks very much for joining us. We don't have a topic yet picked for our next session, but let's say it's going to be August 21st, same time, 1 p.m. Eastern Daylight. And if you have any ideas, thoughts, suggestions for topics, please send them to me on LinkedIn, and we will put them in the queue and hopefully get them in soon. So we also want to invite people to join the community we created called the Cybersecurity Awareness Forum, and we have lots of discussions there. That's where we post notifications about new sessions and the videos that we publish. So really want to thank Beck, Thea, everybody else, and Ryan for joining us today. All the great comments and discussions. Would love to see you back again next time. So hopefully you have a good July and August. We'll see you in August. Thanks very much, everybody.
Okay. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, everybody.
Bye, everyone.